Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an incredibly frustrating problem that pretty much every developer using AI has hit: coding agents completely hallucinating during complex AWS deployments. You know the drill. We love our AI assistants, but the second we ask them to deploy actual infrastructure, things go off the rails, and you're just left staring at a massive wall of red error text. Well, today, we're breaking down a brand new solution built specifically to fix exactly that.
So let's get into it. We all know these agents are ridiculously smart when it comes to writing raw code, right? But why do they constantly skip critical permissions or, call outdated APIs the second they touch AWS? You ask it to set up a simple API gateway, it confidently spits out a script, and boom, total failure on execution. It's a super common scenario, and it really all boils down to how these models learn and what they actually know about the current state of a cloud.
Which brings us to the real root of the problem: training data versus live context. Look, AWS ships new services and updates APIs way faster than any static training model can possibly keep up with. If an API changed 6 months ago, your agent's training data simply doesn't know about it. But by replacing that rigid, outdated memory with live AWS context, meaning real-time documentation, step-by-step guidance, and fully audited actions, your agent actually stops guessing. It starts knowing exactly what your current cloud environment needs.
Here's the agenda for today. First, we'll cover the coding agent gap. Second, the 4 core toolkit components. Third, the toolkit in action. Fourth, security and limits. And finally, setup and rollout.
All right, Section 1, the coding agent gap. Let's talk about moving beyond static training models.
To really understand the fix here, we have to understand that gap. Because without real-time guidance, even the absolute smartest models working on multi-step AWS workflows are inevitably going to make mistakes. They'll confidently skip a critical AIM permission, like, say, forgetting to grant API Gateway the permission to actually invoke a Lambda function. Or they'll just flat-out fail because an API changed a few months ago. It's not that the agent isn't smart, it just lacks the specific, up-to-date roadmap required to navigate modern AWS infrastructure.
Moving on to Section 2. The 4 core toolkit components, or the anatomy of live context.
So how do we actually fix this? Well, the Agent Toolkit is built on 4 core components. The first major pillar is the AWS MCP Server. Now, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. You can think of this server as a direct, highly secure bridge for your agent. Instead of relying on its stale internal memory, the agent connects to this managed endpoint, and that gives it the superpower of searching current AWS docs in real time. Even better, it lets your agent make authenticated, validated AWS API calls using your IAM credentials. Every single call goes through this managed server, meaning absolutely nothing happens in the dark.
The second piece of the puzzle? Agent skills. A skill is essentially a highly efficient, compact runbook written in simple Markdown. And what's absolutely crucial here is that these step-by-step instructions are written by real human beings who know exactly where agents usually get stuck. So instead of pasting some massive 10,000 token documentation page into your prompt, the agent just loads this super compact skill. It follows the steps, like that notorious add permission step, and then simply drops the skill when the task is done.
Component number 3, plugins. AWS knows we all use a ton of different tools, so they've made this incredibly seamless. If you're using Claude Code or Codex, there's a bundled plugin that installs the MCP server config and a set of skills with just a couple of quick commands. But hey, if you prefer Cursor, Windsurf, Claude Desktop, or literally any other MCP-compatible client, you are not left out. You just drop the AWS MCP server directly in your existing config file, and you're good to go.
And the fourth and final component is rules files. These are project-level configurations that you just drop right into your repo. They essentially act as the ground rules for your specific session. A rules file tells your agent right from the get-go, hey, for this project, always use the MCP server for API calls and make sure you search for a skill before you start a new task. It completely aligns the agent's behavior with your team's workflow the very second it opens the project.
Which brings us to Section 3, the toolkit in action, 2 minutes and 35 seconds to deployment.
Let's get away from the theory for a second and see how this all comes together in the real world. The source material highlights a very specific task: deploy a Python Lambda function, integrate it behind an API Gateway HTTP API, ensure it returns a simple hello on the root GET path, and deploy the whole shebang into the US East 1 region. This is exactly the kind of multi-step, slightly fiddly process where unaided agents usually stumble. But the execution here is just fascinating.
First off, the agent searches the live docs and finds a skill for connecting Lambda to API gateway. But here is where its judgment really kicks in. The skill it found is actually written for older REST APIs. The agent realizes you asked for an HTTP API, which is newer, simpler, and cheaper. So it dynamically adapts the instructions on the fly. It writes the code, zips it up, creates the IAM role, and uploads the Lambda. Then, and this is a crazy part, it remembers to execute the exact add permission step to let the API and Lambda talk to each other. Untrained models literally always miss that. Finally, it notices the API was created with a catch-all route and intelligently scopes it down to just the get method, so it uses the skill for structure but applies its own judgment perfectly.
All right, Section 4, Security and Limits. Let's talk about guardrails for platform engineering teams. Because while that combination of structure and judgment is amazing, platform engineers absolutely need guardrails. The most crucial point here is visibility. Because the agent routes all its requests through the AWS MCP server using your specific IAM credentials, every single action is fully validated. And more importantly, it's 100% auditable. Every API call, every parameter within that call lands squarely in CloudTrail with your identity attached to it. No shadow deployments here. You see exactly what the agent did on your behalf.
However, if you're managing a team, you absolutely must be aware of this number, 27. That is the hard cap limit for concurrent connections per account, per region. You also get 3 requests per second sustained. Now, for one person, that's totally fine. But if you're rolling this out to a massive development team, that 27 connection limit is going to sneak up on you much faster than you'd expect. You'll definitely want to keep a very close eye on your CloudWatch usage metrics.
And finally, Section 5, Setup and Rollout. How to actually implement this safely today.
So now that we know the limits, how do we roll it out? The absolute golden rule drawn from the source material is this: start read only. AWS provides specific IAM condition keys that let you write policies exclusively for agent-initiated actions. This means you can block write operations through the MCP server entirely, even if the developer's personal IAM role has write access. Let your teams get super comfortable with the agent searching docs and loading skills first. You can always loosen the permissions later, but trying to go the other way and rip permissions away is always a massive headache.
Honestly, the logistics of getting started are wonderfully simple. The toolkit itself is completely 100% free. You only pay standard AWS rates for the actual infrastructure your agent spins up, like that Lambda function we were just talking about. It seamlessly uses your existing credentials too. Whether you use AWS Login or Configure SSO, it just works. And while your agent can operate on resources in any global region, just keep in mind that the MCP servers themselves currently live in US East 1 and EU Central 1. By replacing those static, outdated training models with live, step-by-step context, we are fundamentally changing what AI assistants can do in the cloud. The days of frustrating, hallucinated deployments are basically over. With your agent now fully equipped to navigate AWS with live, perfectly audited precision, the real question isn't whether AI can handle your infrastructure anymore. The question is your team ready to move fast enough to keep up with it?